And the fun part about it is because of people like what you guys are doing and all the different publications and stuff out there. I mean, you can subscribe to every publication. Funeral service costs you probably $500 a year. But I mean, it's for everything. You read Creedy's book and you read Jake Johnson's book, and all that stuff is out there. There's more webinars today than ever before. I mean, I watched one earlier this afternoon, even though it's not stuff that even means that much to me, but it makes me more knowledgeable if I am talking to somebody who wants to know about that or has any feelings about that. But, I'm not going to need it was about your recommendations you send out and all that kind of stuff, the follow-ups and that. I'm not going to need that, but I mean, at least I know about it. And there's more of that today than ever before. We've got the tools. Use them to your advantage and see if they work.
Welcome to the Direct Cremation Podcast with your hosts, Tyler Yamasaki and Will DeMichaelis. Hi, thank you for joining us on the Direct Cremation Podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Yamasaki, CEO of Parting Pro. And as always, I'm here with my co-host, Will DeMichaelis, former manager of the Omega Society, a cremation brand that serves over 4,500 families per year. So if you could dream up a list of professional death care accomplishments, today's guest has probably exceeded your list. From living above the funeral home until age 21, to then starting, growing, and eventually selling one of the largest cremation societies in the world in Cremation Society of Minnesota, and mixing in being a past president of the Cremation Association of North America and Funeral and Memorial Information Council. He has done it all. And from speaking with him, he's still hungry for more. Please welcome today's guest, Kevin Waterston.
Thank you for having me. Looking forward to it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for being on the podcast.
That's about it. Not that exciting of a time.
Yeah, just a few small things there. I actually think we can probably spend an entire episode on each small part of your life because I think a lot of them are pretty exceptional and there's probably a lot that goes into it. But why don't we just kind of start from the beginning? Because I think the way, at least from what I know, that you've approached building the Cremation Society of Minnesota was super interesting.
Basically, we started the Cremation Society with our back up against the wall. We had a small funeral home in South Minneapolis, very much like, hundreds and thousands of small funeral homes all around the country. And we had my brother and myself were going into it, and this is about the late 70s to early 80s. I graduated in like 81. He graduated in probably like 76, went in the military, though, for a while. And then we were sitting there, my dad and myself, and my parents were living, but they were taking extended vacations at that point and leaving the business to run to us, which worked out fine. But we just realized we need to do something. We rented out motorhomes. We did all sorts of crazy stuff for making money at a point, and saw that the cremation business on the West Coast, East Coast, has starting to grow, and more people want just the direct cremation. We were really introduced to the direct cremation. My father was a member of what they called the Minnesota Funeral and Memorial Society, and that was a group of basically funeral haters, funeral director haters, I should say, like lawyers and stuff like that wanted cheap cremation or a cheap immediate burial or something like that. And they had a system where you go in, you pay money to get their forms, and then you fill out the forms, you bring it to the funeral home. You're supposed to bring one to your doctor. You're supposed to bring one to your church. They had so many forms on there to sign up with. You couldn't even read the last one because it was so faint, with the carbon paper in the middle. It was just a crazy situation. So what we looked at, and in 1980 or 1979, my mother was diagnosed with cancer, and we didn't want to do anything while we knew that was happening. She died in June of 80, and really in the end of 1980s when we really kicked off the Cremation Society. But in the meantime, we did a lot of research. We went to California, the East Coast, the West Coast, California. We met Tom Weber, director of Telephase Society, and saw what he did, and took ideas from there, how they work their whole system. Went up to Richard John Gordon's at Neptune Society up in Northern California and spent a few days with him and seen what he had up there. Ran to Manny Weintraub from Neptune Society in Southern California and see what they were doing. So we got to know a lot of these people like that. Went out to in Florida to see Les Dwyer from National Cremation Society. And that's when SCI had just bought that from his wife's name was Ruth. I can't remember what his name was, but anyhow, they bought the National Cremation Society, and it was in its infancy, but we wanted to see it and took ideas and kind of went along and looked at everything we could do and take it back home. In the meantime, we kind of had the time because we weren't really pursuing too much with my mother being sick. So we looked and tried to put it all together, try to form a way that we could be doing it better. So we looked at the way that they were getting memberships, for one. And they'd virtually have a form, and ours was just a single page form. We even use it to this day, just a single page form saying all the vital statistics that they have. They want to be in, on the bottom, I understand authorized request of Cremation Society of Minnesota, cremate the remains of. They put their name, and then have it witnessed by somebody, preferably a next of kin if possible. And so they would send that in to us with a $15 registration fee, or they could prepay it if they want to. So we just came up with this really kind of a simple trifold brochure and with this registration form, and started, people would call and send it out. We put a little, just a small ad in the Minneapolis Star Tribune or the St. Paul newspaper, back when people used to really read the newspapers and stuff. And in this small little ad, we'd get tons of little responses back. We would just take and put the brochure with the registration forms in there, throw them in the mailbox, and lo and behold, we didn't even keep track of, percent of what we got or anything like that at all. We were just too busy just trying to do it. And what was really fun is that it all started snowballing, and we would get them. And so one time we thought, let's just try to put a insert in the paper, kind of like a Target ad insert type thing. So not that big, with just a 4-page deal, was 11 by 17 folded in half, with our whole brochure, and then also the registration form was on that. And we put that in the mail. We were actually, it was over like a holiday weekend, like a President's Day weekend or something. And we were over in California at the time when it went in that Sunday's paper. We used to go to all Ron Hass's shows in Tiburon, California. He'd have a private get together with a bunch of funeral directors, and we were there. And it was over, like I said, the holiday weekend. And so on the Tuesday or Wednesday when we were flying home from that, I remember calling home from the airport saying, what's going on? And they said, well, we've got about 60 of these responses back. And it just all of a sudden clicked, we're doing this thing. And this thing just really started moving, much bigger than what we anticipated it to be. We thought it'd be 100 calls here, 100 calls there type thing. But, it didn't know what it would grow up into be the size of business it is. So, and we took it and one thing that we really had to do, we had to look at it as a business, even though it was we were doing a lot of service for people and try to figure out how do we get more people to prearrange and pre-register with us. And the pre-arrangements, the prepaids were just simple as can be, because they would just send them in. We'd virtually we had to take them to the bank. We couldn't use an insurance product at the time with the state of Minnesota laws. So we'd take them to a bank, and they were $345 back then in the very early 80s, what we charged. And we took them in there, and that was during the Carter years. And so that was, the highest interest rate we ever got was 16.3% interest. So these things were just doubling, and we were, just going crazy at the time. So then the state of Minnesota required us to give back anything over than what our general price list charge was. So we couldn't. So if one had gone $100 over, usually we'd just keep that. But then they said, no, we have to give that back. So we actually have given back more money to some folks. Now this is like in the early 90s, I'm saying, giving more money to some folks than what they paid us in, just for a little period of time there when those interest rates were so high. Now reversing it now, and what the interest rates are is just terrible for that. But but we started putting money into insurance policies and had quite an insurance deal going. But we didn't. We always had an insurance company. We had an insurance agency ourselves, but we didn't have any agents. It was just people we would fill out the forms, sign them, and send them in. So we weren't paying any commission. It wasn't anybody's going out there doing anything. We would virtually take these things in the mail. We'd send in the money and not call them up saying, do you want to prepay this, this, and this? Just didn't have time. I mean, without having agents do it. And then, what we found was you take these agents, they sit there and tell people things that they can't promise. So we were, just happy to have it the way we did. But it was fun because a lot of just serving families and a lot of marketing. So we took the ideas that worked, the brochure. The rate of cremation was 6% at the time we started the Cremation Society, and now it's at 72.7. Canada's latest statistics just came out, and in Minnesota it's expected to be 86.8 by 2032.
Kevin, I think one of the things that you said that you understated, but I want to restate, that's really important and a really good business approach that you had, was to travel to other states where you weren't competing
finding the business models and the people executing those business models to pick their brains to bring back home. I think that was a brilliant idea. And was the marketing that you took home in those brochures, is that stuff that you got from Neptune on the West Coast and in Florida from visiting those folks?
For example, even the color of our brochure came from Telephase. And it still is that today. A little brochure we have, a plain kind of a tannish, brownish brochure.
Yeah.
So we took that from Telephase and I guess, you listen to these people like Tom Weber from Telephase. This guy was a engineer, some electrical engineer or chemical engineer or something. He started up this thing because he couldn't find a cremation place for his dad when he died in Los Angeles. So when you look at California and you look at all the people that moved out there in that period of time, well, you know this better than anybody will. All the people that moved out there during that period of time and didn't have any, brothers and sisters married out there or anything like that at all. They didn't have the relationships in that. And so they were getting out there and not finding a place for cremation. So Tom started a crematory and, these guys really had it tough because talk about hated. I mean, in California, they changed laws and everything like that about what they could do. And they were just trying to make it so it's a reasonable cremation for people. And they were getting fought tooth and nail. And so a lot of that stuff we looked at and said, is this going to happen to us? Are we going to be in the same situation? So I think actually he was probably one that we really learned a lot from. And then he said he was being interviewed by 60 Minutes and for the thing. So around Christmas time or New Year's of 1980, they came up with a 60 Minutes to Destroy. Mike Wallace did it. And it was changing of the people's values and their morals and their mores, he says. And then he talked about the cremation rate. He talked to Tom Weber. He talked to, they called him Colonel Shinders. I can't think of his name offhand, but anyhow, they talked to other people that were in the cremation business out there. And the funny part about it is that Tom Weber didn't know when it was going to air. So my brother kept bugging 60 Minutes and finally found out the weekend it was going to air and called Tom and said, hey, it's going to be on this weekend. He said, well, how do you know that? And he says, he ended up getting to know the people at CBS to find out about this stuff. But anyhow, it aired. We used it as a promotional thing. We used to have a booth at the Minnesota State Fair, and we had this thing on a VHS. And we took it and we put all our brochures out, and we had TVs there. And it was just basically 60 Minutes doing this interview thing. And it was really interesting because if we manned the booth, if we had somebody sitting there trying to hand out the brochures, people wouldn't come in. But if they were just sitting there watching the guy from 60 Minutes, they'd go up there and they'd look at the brochure and they'd look at the 60 Minutes thing and watch it and take it with them. And they actually stay there and stay focused for a few minutes while this was going on. But if we had somebody behind the booth, it would kill it. So. And then it was really kind of funny, too, because Cana was always on about the same time the fair was. So my brother and I were always usually going to Cana. We'd set the thing up, but we'd have a couple of our people there manning it. Well, it turned out one time we didn't have enough people to man it. So we had the ladies at the sunglass booth on the other side of the hallway. And we put a big coaxial cable up and down, and they kept putting the new tape in all the time and rewinding it for us and made sure the brochures were out there. Well, the fair got mad because they wanted somebody in the booth, but it just goes to show you, people were interested, but they didn't want to talk to you about it.
Yeah,
they didn't want to be sold anything.
It's it's a real good experiment.
Yeah,
really good experiment.
Yeah, it worked out well, and the reason we started, the reason we started the state fair is because the newspaper went on strike that time. At that time, so that what can we do to get some of these brochures out? And we, you go to senior fairs and all that kind of stuff and get brochures out and that. But it was kind of funny. The first thing we ever did, we went to a senior fair in St. Cloud, Minnesota, and these brochures were just freshly printed, and we put a brochure on every chair that was in the senior fair. We didn't have a booth or anything like that because we couldn't get in there at all. But they let us put this on the chair. We got home that day and the phone rings, and the phone rings kind of look at it like, well, who could that be? And they had a question, and I remember their last name was Blow, BLOW, and they'd sent the whole thing, and it just got to roll like that. It just got to be. Got to be easy. We'd go to a funeral directors convention or something. Somebody said, well, how's this going? We don't know. We're probably going to drop it, and just kind of downplayed it.
Yeah.
But and going to things like that was tough. I mean, we'd go to these funeral directors convention or a local convention, and you'd have a guy that'll sit there and just chew your ass out right in front of everybody. To this day, my wife and my brother's wife have hardly been to any of those state conventions. I have been to Cana. And national type things. but never took them to a state because they didn't want to put them through that kind of crap, So
That's funny. That was actually going to be one of my questions, is because even today in 2023, there's this thought that, there's two types of businesses, right? There's this direct cremation business that's ruining the industry or what have you. And then there's the traditional guys who view that. And I mean, you're talking about 80s, 90s. The backlash must have been even way worse.
Try going to a mortuary school when you're in the cremation business, and half the guys in the class are funeral directors. It's really kind of funny though. One of the funeral directors was in my class. They used to give me a lot of crap about it, in class, and that he's probably one of my best friends in funeral service now. So it's really kind of come around that these people realize, hey, these guys weren't any dummies. They figured this thing out. They're doing 5,500 calls a year. It's working. So, and it was a lot of fun doing it. I think the interesting thing was that we really had to get the name recognition out there.
Mm-hmm.
For example, Ron Hass, the guy from had Abbott and Hass Mortuary, had Mortuary Management Magazine. He used to think it was just crazy that we had these big facilities, and I mean big facilities, standard funeral homes. The 6,000 square feet was our first one, and that included all the living space. And we'd have these buildings, and what was nice about it is we had places for memorial services. So we would, not only do the cremation, we would do the memorial service. And I think, to be perfectly honest with you, I think that was our best thing going for us, because you ask somebody, the Cremation Society of Minnesota? Yeah, I was there for a service one time. They can't tell you who it even was. They forgot the name of the person who they were there for, but they remember being there. They stepped across the threshold. They've heard our radio ads. They've seen our TV ads. So all that stuff just kind of kept going over and over and over again. And I think that being in these buildings, it was very important, especially back in those days, and realizing these are nice facilities. We were one of the first people to have a reception room in Minneapolis, because it was illegal at the time, but we just changed an address name and kind of played around with it and pressed the law a little bit on that one. But now it's legal all over the place.
Kevin, you really touched on how you created a sustainable, growing business and built it into a large business that really sustained its growth. And you talked a bit about kind of what made you different. But if you had to pick a couple of things that you'd say set yourself apart from other folks doing the same thing, what would you think that is? And maybe after that, what's one piece of business advice you'd give to an owner trying to do exactly what you did? You could maybe distill it into a secret sauce.
I would have to say that if you look at the cremation market itself, and you look at the nowadays everybody's doing it. Johnson Funeral Home and Cremation Service. Then they didn't dare do anything like that at all. Even we had a real small little sign underneath our big sign that said Cremation Society of Minnesota office. So we were kind of scared of it too, even, and we were doing it. Let me tell you a story here. What really set me on this whole thing is we were doing a PR campaign where we got a newspaper wrote a big article about us, and we were using it as a cemetery for the cremations at the time. Well, the guy that operates the crematory at the cemetery talked about, boxes leaked and stuff like that, had totally off the wall stuff, about cremation and that type of thing. And I thought, this is going to kill us, this whole thing. And we got tons of members in because of that article, and I still to this day, it scares me thinking about it. I remember going to the bank, and in the bank lobby, I ran into a good friend of my parents. And this guy told me, he says that I think you guys really, really kind of screwing this thing up, screwing up your parents' business type thing, with this cremation society. And it really kind of hit me hard, and it kind of almost gave me the pressure, hey, I can't screw this thing up. We got to get this thing right. And, and that's what we felt. We've since cremated both him and his wife. And, they wouldn't have been cremations back then, but they were by the time they passed away.
Wow.
But another thing too is that we used to buy our cars out of town, about 50 miles away from a small dealer, and he'd virtually show us the invoice. And going through the invoice for the automobiles, and he had a marketing charge in there for the area. And what's this all about? He said, well, every car that we sell, we put $200, $400 is toward marketing the next, basically trying to sell the next car, that goes into the commercials and all that stuff with GM. Then I came back, and Mark and I talked about it. I said, that's a pretty smart idea. I said, we should take $200 a call and devote that totally to marketing for the next call. And we started doing that. And that's how 1 year, one of the last years we were spending over $1 million a year in advertising, and basically just kind of kept that formula going that it had, that we could do. And it worked out well. We just put a ton of money into advertising and we're disciplined to do it. And it certainly came back. But the problem is with a regular funeral home, guy's got one or two chapels. He puts money in advertising. You don't see it right away. It's not like you're selling snow tires on the snowiest day of the year. Right. You just don't see the results of it. It takes a long time. And so they'll pull back, and just we'll just keep the church bulletins going and the yellow pages and that kind of stuff. So
I think what you said is so important about name recognition. When you pour that into advertising and advertise in channels and concentrate on channels that really build that name recognition in your area, what you're really doing is digging a moat around your business in the long term so that it can insulate itself in the medium and long term, and all those dividends get paid back to you in spades as time goes on, because that word of mouth and name recognition is exponential in your immediate area.
In that, we one place we go to is there's an author by the name of Trout and Reese, and they wrote a book to produce positioning and market sense and branding, and they were real big in that before it was even the branding part was ever that big, the marketing. And we kind of followed a lot of what they said. They had done some stuff personally for Batesville, and even said in their conference that the death care industry is a very low interest to no interest item. And meaning by that, I mean, unless you've got a death or you may know you're expecting a death, you really could care less. Right. Look at all the tire ads you see in the newspaper and things like that. Well, unless you need tires, you could care less. You can't even look at them. Yeah. So unless there's some reason to know it out there. So it's a tough thing to do. That branding thing, you just got to keep that name out there. But not only the name's out there, they may be going to a service in there. They've seen it in obituaries, and they're realizing that, hey, these people are doing a lot of cremations. Now, in the meantime, we really didn't have any competition. My brother always said, these guys can just leave us alone for 15 years. Well, they let us alone for about 25, before they really started coming on to us. Yeah. And, now we've got people out there doing it for a third less the price, and we're still keeping our market share. So
that's the mode.
So, wait. Yeah. Before we're going on, and I know we all know right now on this podcast how big Cremation Society of Minnesota is, but could you maybe give us the scale and size of which you guys actually were, maybe at the time of your acquisition or even now?
Well, at the time we sold to them, we were doing about 5,500 calls a year, and basically out of 5 buildings, 4 in the metropolitan area here, and one in Duluth, Minnesota, which is 150 miles up north. And basically, we just got kind of, we were driving up to Duluth all the time, and we actually going past Duluth, way in the very corner of the state called Grand Marais. And we would go up there, and I think what happened is up there, the funeral director that was in Grand Marais, somebody would say cremation to him, and I think his face would get all red and get all pissed off, and they would call us, then we'd call us back and say, hey, we were just up there, we want you guys to take care of it now. Even though they would call and get our costs before and then find out what it was going to be. So we went up to a funeral directors convention up there in Duluth one time, a Minnesota convention, my brother and myself. And we knew nothing really about Duluth other than we'd been there, smelt fishing and that type of stuff before. And it's kind of a tourist attraction from Minnesota. And we just wanted to see what all the funeral homes looked like. Well, in the meantime, we drive past this old Crown Auto building. It's 13,500 square feet. And it was a one-level building. In Duluth, everything's built on a hill. It was a one-level building. We thought this would be great. No handicap problems, nothing like that at all. It was a pretty new building. And we called the thing at the broker. So we've really got it under contract, and that was fine. In the meantime, my brother had taken a whole bunch of pictures, but by the time we got the call from the realtor back, we were walking into the Duluth area thing. And my brother takes the film and the camera, exposes the whole film, and throws the thing out in the trash can at the convention center. Well, in August of that year, the guy calls us up and says, "Hey, that deal fell through, and we got a real good deal on the building." And so we went up there. So that was our most remote location, 150 miles of a Cremation Society location. In the early 90s, we built a funeral home in Bismarck, North Dakota, with one of our employees who wanted to go up there, and because everything was low in group up there. So we went up to Bismarck, built a funeral home. My brother and myself owned 2/3 of it. He owned 1/3 of it. And my brother and I owned the property. We never planned on retiring with that building, but we sold it to him then probably, maybe 10 years into it. And it's very successful today. It's doing 300 and some calls. And it came from scratch. And I always say, pick your own fights. And Bismarck had all the funeral homes were owned by the Canadian, were owned by Lowen at the time. And the people in Bismarck, always were mad because the Canadians were screwing them on the wheat deals and all this kind of stuff. So it was a great, we went up there as the only American-owned funeral home. When we open up and have our open house, we have our flagpole outside, and the guy that raised the flag was the last survivor of the people who raised the flag at Iwo Jima, a guy by the name of Chuck Lindbergh. And so we made, did a lot of PR out of that and got a lot of people interested, and it just has worked out fine. It really worked out well. We followed that pretty closely, that whole loan thing, and knew we could go against it. We were one of the first people in the war room up at Lowen to look at their properties when it was after they became available for sale. Mm-hmm. That was a lot of fun. That's totally different than this. So anyhow, then we built. We had a guy in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, that had a Proc funeral home, and he wanted to part of the cremation. I want to do the Cremation Society thing, and so we said, here's what you got to do, this. And, he says, no, I want to be partners with you guys. I don't want to do it alone. So we partnered up with him and did that for about 15, 20 years, and ended up buying that whole funeral home and his share of the Cremation Society. And so we had Wisconsin, Minnesota, and North Dakota for a while.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Yeah, it was. Wow. And the thing is that there was a period of time there where the money just rolling in. You didn't know what to do with it all. It was crazy. And we were doing well. I had great employees. We could go out and we could leave for a week if we needed to, and everything worked out fine. So, but I'd say the biggest lesson is the advertising. Yeah, certainly the advertising. And we used to have fun with that. We'd get a young person in there from the radio TV company, and they would say, "Well, go out and talk to these people at the Cremation Society," and thinking that they're not going to do anything. Well, we want to tell them, well, here's what we want: the noon news, and we want it every day every day that it's on. And he writes it up that according to his sheet, it's going to be $150,000. No. Here's what we'll do: we'll give you $50,000, and we'll give it to you in a check right now. Put it in a self-addressed stamped envelope back to us. And he said, well, and he'd take it back, and he said, well, my sales manager is not going to go for this. Oh, plus you got to do it at the end of the month and preferably the end of the quarter. So he said, they're not going to accept this thing. So I said, fine. If they don't, just put it. That's what we gave you, the self-addressed stamped envelope. Put it in the envelope, drop it in the mailbox. Don't even bother calling us. We don't care. But if you can do it, let us know. And so sure enough, he'd call back on 2 hours later saying, I just can't believe this. My sales manager. so we'd get we'd start out at a pretty reasonable rate. Yeah. And I think I ended up with such a good rapport with a lot of the people at the news stations and stuff like that the TV stations, that we ended up getting pretty good rates all along. So nice. And had a pretty good showing.
The power of negotiation that can't go understated. That's a testament to your skill.
That money in hand is a powerful.
Yeah. Yes, it is.
And quotas. Just put them against their quotas.
Yep, that's exactly it. Give it that time.
So I feel like we can spend. I feel like you can write a book on how you grew this. I feel like everything you've said is not as traditional, but it's still super effective, and I think we can all see that. But I do want to move into an area where other people may not have as much experience in dealing with, and I don't think it's a secret now, but you eventually sold the business to Foundation Partners. Mm-hmm. I don't know the details, but I've heard it's one of probably the larger sides of their acquisitions, and I would say that it definitely revealed some of the intentions that FPG has as a group in going into, the high volume, the efficient cremation businesses. Mm-hmm. Could you maybe tell us what that was like from a business standpoint in them approaching you? And
what happened was we started looking at it, and at the time really wasn't planning on it. I was 58 years old. My brother was 68 years old at the time, 10 years older than me. We both had kids in it, and started looking at, when is a good time to sell? Over the years, got to know Tom Johnson from Johnson Consulting, and well before Johnson Consulting, even before Keystone and all that kind of stuff. But anyhow, and we talked to them and thought, let's get a kind of a feeling of what we should be doing here. So we went out to Scottsdale and visited there, and actually had called and talked to Steve, not Tally, Steve. Anyhow, at SCI, I knew a few of those guys, and went to SCI and talked to them there. Really, Johnson's one who really negotiated the best part of it for us. And they just knew that these people really wanted it. They wanted something like that to help jumpstart them more into this thing too. They had bought quite a few funeral homes, but a lot of them they even bought from SCI, and they were some very traditional funeral homes. Sure. And I think they were in the right track, and that's what kind of helped attract us to it too, is they wanted to really get big into the cremation market. Yeah. So we looked at that, and with what they were doing at the cremation market, and I thought, yeah, this would be a good fit. One thing what attracted me with them is I wanted to be more part of it. Thought it'd be fun to be part of a bigger thing, and trying to take more of these concepts and take them on the road with them, some of their places. But, they have their own people and their own ideas, and really, they didn't use me for what I was using for. So I had a 5-year contract with them. It stayed a little longer than 5 years because they were building what they call a DCN, which is a Decedent Care Network, which is a beautiful cremation facility and embalming facility and holding facility and all the space for our staff. And, they got a 300-person cooler and just built a real nice thing. I wanted to see that through. And after that was all done, then I retired from that. So from them. But, they're centered on cremation. And I think that might have had a lot to do with what they were willing to come up and certainly pay us more of a premium than anybody else was offering us at the time.
Did you have expectations of your value or that premium going into that process, or were you frankly surprised?
Actually not. I think we were more on the surprise level of what it could do. And it was a kind of a thing, do we want to do this or not? And then you sit there and you look at it and think, why beat your head against the wall for the next few years? If I was going to stay with them 5 years, then they offered me a great contract. I can't complain about that for the 5 years. And then I knew I'd be 63 at the end of that whole thing. So, and that's exactly what happened. I just turned 64 this week. So I was just happy with it. It's their place. I've never had any regret about it ever since. A lot of people worry about that, but, I wasn't, making removals anymore or doing anything like that, even though part of the stuff I love to do. So my favorite thing about the business was making house calls, because you can't get closer to the time of death than you can at a house call and know what the situation was there and kind of get a feel of why did they call us versus, you drive by 4 funeral homes on the way to get to their house. Right. Why didn't they call one of them? What happened there? What was the difference? So that used to be my little marketing class every day, on a house call. So
brilliant.
Yeah. A lot of fun. Yeah. A lot of good.
We're seeing a lot more of these acquisitions happen in death care from some pretty notable brands that have been around for quite a while, not just to FPG, but to some of the other bigger groups as well.
Yeah.
And I remember asking you, are you the happiest you've ever been since you sold? And your response was, well, I'm the richest I've ever been. And I thought that was pretty hilarious. Because I think what people don't realize is that when you do sell, a huge part of your professional and sometimes personal identity kind of goes with that, right? And it's kind of like your baby that you've grown from the beginning. And, you've accomplished a lot. Were there any emotions that came up that you found yourself feeling that you didn't expect once you had to let go of the business?
I can't really honestly say so. I think that, you look at the responsibility of that and the responsibility of all the people, and all of a sudden you lose that. You lose that I said responsibility, but I mean, you lose that pressure of is everybody happy? Is everything going good? It's something that somebody does in the middle of the night that you have no control over. What always bothered me is if we do a real well-known person and all of a sudden a picture of that person shows up, or something of that nature. And we did everything we could to try to refrain from that. But, if anything happened, and we had good people, I think very, very good people at the time. So I wasn't worried about it. I felt we were turning it over at the right time. We knew every dime was there in pre-need. Everything was really well set up. Our numbers were good. They kept growing. You don't want to sell when you're going down, down, down. You want to sell when you're going up, up, up. And that's what they're looking at. Yeah. So we knew that was the time. And then you sit there, and like I said, 58 years old, and you'll be 63 when this thing is done, and you can do what you want to then. And so I was very, very, very pleased with that. And my brother was older than I am, and he had more of a hard time selling than I did. He didn't want to sell that bad. And looking back at it now, he's very, very happy we did.
Yeah,
happy we did. So, but there's a lot of responsibility in owning something like
big
that.
Time. Yeah, big time. A lot of pressure. And it's a unique business where you can wake up with a lot of serious problems, and it's a lot of pressure.
Right. where are the rings? Where, what's wrong type thing.
Yeah.
And it's always the little stuff too. It's never the,
Absolutely.
Yeah. Always little stupid stuff. So, but now, I've I don't know if I've mentioned this to you guys before, but I'm looking at in the world of leasing with crematories and leasing big items. And I've explored that a lot, and I've talked to quite a few people on it. And so I'm going to start working on that quite a bit. And, so we take these crematories, is $300,000 for a crematory today, and these people don't want to go to their local banks, don't know anything about it. So you can, lease it to them, and at the end of 5 years, it's their crematory, and you made a little bit of money on the lease, the whole thing. So I'm working on that project now. So
my next question was actually going to be, as an entrepreneur, what you've done is aspirational, but it's been 4 to 5 years since you've sold. So what was your next thing? Because I know that you would be getting bored. You can't sit around and just,
Yeah. I've
relax.
I've got a great office here in my home. And so it's an easy thing to get, to work out of. I can use the DCN. They even named a room after me there at the DCN. So if I needed a place to go to, I could go there. But for some reason, I couldn't be here for any reason. But so it works out fine. I mean, I got places to run to. And then another thing, too, you just get to know so many people over the years. You buy a dozen crematories, the people who fix them, the people who sell them, the whole 9 yards on it. So it's a good network to have, being a past president of Cana. And actually, when you look at a lot of the ideas we have, we took them from people we met at Cana. My brother and I used to do a seminar every year down in Acamal, Mexico, which is south of Cancun, about 40 miles. And we'd have about 20 people there that are in the cremation business. And I got to know a lot of those people through Cana. And actually, they got to be known as the Mexican Mafia that we had. But it really worked out well. I mean, we had great think tanks from people with cremation companies all around the country, people that we helped start, around the country. So. And it was great. We haven't done it now in 5 years since we've sold, but they're even bugging me trying to get the band back together again a little bit. So, but it's amazing when you put, and this is what I kind of wish we'd have done more with foundation partners. Put some of these, you got John McQueen, you got Mark Krause, you got myself, you got a lot of people like you, Will. Let's put these people together and have a think tank, and what can we be doing? I
love this idea.
Yeah.
We can
I remember one of the first things I did with Foundation Partners, and they had this girl calls up from Florida, and they were doing them for like $600 or something like that. And she's only doing 1 or 2 a month. And I said, well, what should I do? I said, quit answering the phone and do something else. It's not going to work that way.
No.
So you got to look at it. And I think their tulip cremation thing has got a lot of potential.
Sure.
I wish I was involved more of that. That interests me. I read a ton of stuff, and just reading in the business journal from the NFDA today, and they're talking about what percent of people want to do things online. So it's a changing time. We have to change to those, adapt to some of that stuff. And when they do it online, it's so much simpler, than it was before. But still, we got to make sure we got everything right. Yeah. That's what scares me about it. We're not seeing the people. We're not. You can tell when somebody's lying right to your face or whatever, So, but all in all, I think that's going to be a big thing in the future.
I think so too. So too. And
Kevin, if you need a software, I know one that you can do everything online with.
Well, I don't take care of that stuff.
No, one of the cool things that I admire about you, Kevin, is that I remember seeing you at probably one of my first Canas, which was 6-7 years ago. And then I remember when someone told me that you had sold. And then after that, I still saw you at every Cana. You're still showing up at all the talks. You're still going around talking to everyone. You're still learning. You seem just as engaged from even before you sold, which is, I think, one of the biggest things that you can take away from this is that every step of the way you describe it, it's never like, I knew that this was going to work and I did this. It was like, I tried this, I learned here, I got this from this person, I got this from this person, and I applied it and it took off. And it sounds like your whole career is just about learning and being open to trying new things.
And the fun part about it is because of people like what you guys are doing and all the different publications and stuff out there. I mean, you can subscribe to every publication. Funeral service costs you probably $500 a year. But I mean, it's, for everything, you read Creedy's book and you read Jake Johnson's book and all that stuff is out there. There's more webinars today than ever before. I mean, I watched one earlier this afternoon, and even though it's not stuff that even means that much to me, but it makes me more knowledgeable if I am talking to somebody who wants to know about that or has any feelings about that. But I'm not going to need it was about your the recommendations you send out and all that kind of stuff, the follow-ups and that. I'm not going to need that, but I mean, at least I know about it. And there's more of that today than ever before. So I think that, we've got the tools, use them,
right.
You use them to your advantage and see if they work. And, if it wouldn't have been for some of these people, like I was talking about going out and seeing years ago, I mean, and basically we're 8 blocks away from one of the biggest SCI firms and one of the very first ones we ever purchased back in '74. And to be honest with you, I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for SCI. And I look at what they did. And again, you got to look at how you do it differently. How do you do it better?
How do you make it your own? How do you make it your own?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, I can't sit there and criticize SCI. They've done a hell of a job. They certainly know what they're doing. But how do you work with that? And how do you work around there? I remember going to the funeral home about a mile and a half away from us, remodeled a church and put a funeral home in there. And my brother and I went to the open house and kind of driving home feeling real defeated. How do we compete with that? Well, you just do. You're not them, and you're not that. You got to let the consumer know you're not.
That's I always thought that way. You find your competitor that is doing well, but they don't do what you do. And you take out a sheet of paper or a document and you write down everything that's different about what you do. And there's your marketing. Mm-hmm. That's the foundation that you start with. That exercise alone gets you 80% of the way there. Then it's about getting the flyers done, the brochures done, and then you're there.
Yeah. And what's funny today? It's easier for a person to get in business today than ever before. Yeah. As long as you got a place to hang your shingle on your license. Yeah. When my father got into the business in 1955, he went 100 days one time without a call. 100 days. Now he was doing trade and embalming for people and things like that. But he had a long time between calls. But now today, a guy graduates from mortuary school, takes his test, gets all that stuff done, gets a minivan, puts a tray in the back of the minivan, and buys 2 cots. And you go online to InstaWeb or whatever it is, and create a brochure. Yeah. Create a brochure, and you know what it looks like. You're proofing it and everything. Yeah. Take that brochure out. He goes out and puts a suit on, goes to all these hospices, brings that brochure there, and then all of a sudden, when then he gets a call. When he gets a call, he's got the cots and everything in the van. He goes on the call. Now, when he doesn't have a call, he takes the cots out of the van, takes the tray out of the van, puts the seat up in the van, and puts the Uber sign on. So he's got income. He can do it. He or she can do it. Yep. So there's so much potential out there for people to get into the business. The first call you get's the hardest one to get, but you go to these hospices and they think you're a hero if you do something for a reasonable price.
Yeah, of course.
So yeah,
it's easier today than it is then, especially since you have people like us talking for free on the internet. And we've dematerialized all this expertise for people to play, replay, rewind, fast forward through to take all the tidbits they can and apply it to their business.
Yeah.
15 years ago, 20 years ago, they couldn't just hear us talking like a fly on the wall and scribble down notes about applying these things to their business. And now they can.
Yeah, that's exactly the truth. They so much more info out there today.
Yeah.
So much more and good stuff.
What do you think the biggest existential challenges facing death care providers or funeral homeowners are today?
It's what you hear now everybody talking about is the staffing. I think that, we have such a problem with, and it's a whole different mindset than it was when you graduated from mortuary school 40 years ago. You knew you were going to be out all night long. You knew they were going to, it was going to be like that. And, years ago, we used to get a call in the middle of the night, you embalmed in the middle of the night. Now I hardly ever know anybody who does that. But, so I think that what you see is that, you're going to have a harder time finding staff to do some of the nighttime stuff. And that's what brings the cost up. I don't understand how some of these people can actually run these businesses at such a low cost that they're doing, because I think they're hurting themselves. They're hurting their, if they got to be paying the employees a good amount of money to do it. And the employees deserve a good amount of money because they're they're going out in the middle of the night. They got to be compensated properly for it. So I think what's going to happen is I think you're going to see wages go up. I think you're going to see more people having just doing the nighttime stuff there. They'll have regular shifts like that at some of these larger places. So I do think staffing is our biggest problem. So coming up, the changing in what people are having for services. I'm amazed at the number of people who are having something at whether it be a golf course or whatever it happened to be. And there was a real rage on about 5-10 years ago that we need to be more like a wedding planner type thing. And, we talk about using the Holiday Inn and getting the catering and all that kind of stuff. Well, it was such a far reach. It's easy to say, but, you're just not going to sit there and say, what kind of shrimp do you want this weekend at the country club? That part gets taken care of by the country club. It doesn't get taken care of by us. So it was a nice thought and nice way to have a service, but the people have to request that and have to have it on their own. So.
Got it. Do you see death care being able to rebound from that? I mean, for a while, I think it was how cheap can we go and how stripped down can the services be? Do you feel like there will be a rebound to a little bit more services and a higher cost before it kind of settles down?
I do. And during COVID, I had a daughter get married, and we went to a couple of these wedding places, and they were getting $7,000 for an afternoon for a place. I told Meredith, we're just giving this thing away in our chapels. At $695, we went up to $1,000 that next Monday. It's crazy some of the charges that these other places do have. So I think what does have to happen is we have to realize, how do we in the long term compete? And we're not going to compete at $695. We're going to be doing it, but all we're doing is giving ourselves a job at $695. But if we want to devote that $200 a call for advertising, or when you're younger, even you need to devote even more. Is a part of it. But after you get fully matured, you can put a cap on it on each one of them, how much you're looking at. So I think you're definitely going to have to see. I don't think the prices are going to continue going down. I think you see areas where everybody races to the bottom, but how they can afford to do that, they're going to be out of business. But the problem is, they get out of business, somebody else comes in and tries to do it. Right now. So it's kind of one chases the other one. So I think that definitely the cost factor is it's got to be more realistic. So, but that's happened on how many different industries because of the internet. The internet, you can go and find out all the different costs. And one thing I think that we've done with the internet is that with our name recognition, I really think that people come to our site and see it, and they see the cost and they think, okay, that's reasonable. And then hopefully don't even go to another one. Don't sit there and look at 6, 7, 8 of them. Because I think let's go to the Cremation Society of Minnesota first. It shows the 4 locations, in the cities. So you have it right there. But
okay.
So
I agree, and I think that whole being able to dedicate X dollars to the next case and acquiring that next case is a really important figure that most people don't take into account. Right? They think, okay, hard cost. This is going to cost me $400 or $500. So if I sell it for $700, then there's $200. But that $200 needs to go back into getting the next one and the next one, right?
Creates your budget.
Yep. Exactly. So a question that we always ask all of our guests is, because everyone has different experiences, everyone has seen different things. What do you think death care looks like in 10 years?
I don't think it's going to look a whole lot different than it really does right now, that it's starting to right now. I think you're going to see less and less of the organized religion type thing in there. I think you're going to see more people call them celebrations of life, or some type of reception type thing, where they're not going to be it's not going to be in a church or that. I think we're going to see a little bit less of the church affiliations, but I do think you're going to still see some type of memorialization, which would be the party at the country club or a hotel or, libraries even. I've seen crazy things kind of all over the place saying, hey, that's not a bad idea. Somebody's house. I think you're going to see too that there's a lot of people who die that don't have a whole lot of money either. And then they're just not going to, probably do anything at all. And if they do, maybe something real low budget, and hopefully they can find something like that and do it. So hopefully that I don't think we're going to see when you look at the cremation rate, once it hits 50%, it goes fast. Once it hits that, it goes slow to the next 50%. So you've reached a half, but so now it's less people to grab to get the next 50. So like in Minnesota, what did I say? It was 89% was the rate that was projected by Cana. And
the next 9 years or so.
Yeah, in the next 9 years. So I think, and if you look at those Canaan numbers, they're pretty spot on. It's amazing how I've been on those committees with them before, and they got a statistician on there that has really been hitting the numbers very, very well. And what's funny too is that the funeral directors always looked at, well, we did 19% last year. We'll do 21% next year. And they look at that as 1%. No, that's a bigger number than 1% internally. That's a lot of cremations, but they count it as 1. Yeah. It's a lot more than what they had before. So I think with all of a sudden this kind of hit them, but it hit everybody. Look, it hit Batesville. It hit, look at all the people trying to get in the thing. Like at the ICCFA convention, you hardly saw a casket.
Mm-hmm.
What you're seeing is more technical stuff like the software and printing and all that kind of stuff that is new out there that everybody really needs some type. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's actually the least different that we've had. We've had responses that are saying that it's going to be completely virtual and it's going to be way different, and yours is more on like the slow and steady.
Well,
and
I think that there'll be some more virtual maybe, but I still think it's more of a close to home type thing. They'll have things close to home. What's really amazing now is you have a death and to have that memorial service 3 weeks away, they don't do them right away, because they're waiting for, Mike has to get in here from Oklahoma and Bill from New York, and it's kind of all over the place. So I think that it's not quick like it used to be.
Yeah, it used to be week of or so, next week or so. Yeah, cool. Well, is there anything else? It sounds like you have new business ventures that you're exploring.
Yeah, I'd like to, and hopefully that'll work out. And if anybody wants to lease a crematory, let me know.
Well, given your track record and your ability to execute, I'm sure that there's going to be a successful business at the end of that.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, of course. How can people reach you?
You can call my cell phone at 612-747-1333.
Wow. Okay. Just putting it out there.
Sure. I don't care less. So.
All right. Well, thank you, Kevin. It's been a pleasure. And I think that this is one of the most educational ones we've had. I think your story is inspiring and aspirational. But for the Direct Cremation Podcast, I'm Tyler Yamasaki. As always, with my co-host, Will DeMichaelis. Catch you next time. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. If you ever want to know more, please find us at directcremation.com.